Hi, Will.
Samora, great to see you. How are you doing?
Lovely to see you too. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah, definitely. Same.
It's gonna
Superb.
it's gonna be good. Listen, for everybody else who's not met Will before, Will Keyte is a constitutional law expert. He has a background in teaching, which is awfully handy if you want to explain constitutional law to people. Because generally something we sort of briefly touched on in an earlier conversation on the phone was that people are out of their depth with this sort of thing. Um, uh, we think intentionally, or I think intentionally for sure, because it's no longer really a mandatory part of our education to understand all of this. All of that being said, I was going to take you through a brief glossary of terms, but actually, I think Will has convinced me that his way is better. So now you have to live up to the task. So what we're going to do is I'm going to defer to Will here, and he's going to go through, you know, um, it's not a presentation because this is a conversation, but he does know through experience how to present information so that it's most accessible. So let's allow him to do that for us, because I would like to know what he knows, or at least some of what he knows. So Will, you were going to start by talking to us about the current state of our justice system. Can I hand over to you with that bombshell?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that's uppermost in people's minds, obviously, is what is happening to us at the moment. How are things affecting us right now?
Mhm.
And of course, the issue is that in reality we are losing our liberties left, right, and centre. You can see it almost by the day, and it's just that comes in the form of suggestions, policy suggestions, all the time that we can all see straight away are just going to lead to massive problems in our lives, whether that's the 15-minute zone cities or um, and that's the way that our law system appears to be functioning at the moment, is that the people in that group over there called government
Mhm.
decide for us what is law and what we therefore have to do, and therefore the edges of our liberty,
Mhm.
if you see what I mean. So effectively, the kind of law that is created through government, which is called statute law, seems to be kind of ruling the roost. That is it. It's an end of conversation thing.
Mhm.
That's the way it's going to be, and you don't really have any comeback on it, except maybe to vote occasionally for the people that get to decide this. So,
Mhm.
and that's the problem that we have, because that's not really us in command of our own community and our own liberties.
No wonder
Um,
that people feel disenfranchised, and they don't participate because they don't feel that participation has any meaningful impact on outcome. So yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and it's exactly, and it's the kind of laws that they're producing. These statute laws are punishing people without really intervention of principle, if
Okay,
that makes
explain
sense.
that a little bit in more depth, just so that I can follow it.
A rule or a
Hmm.
regulation or codified law, and we'll get into this a little bit more later on, essentially is drawn up prior to the event, prior to the crime. So
Hmm.
it's essentially trying to create a series of categories or categorizations and boxing of human behavior,
Hmm.
and predicting ahead of time,
Hmm.
if you do that, or if you do something like that, or if you do this, that's the punishment. That's the
Like
yeah.
these algorithms that are being developed and that
Yes.
everybody has a problem with. This is almost like
Yes.
the
Everything's
human
about
version.
programming.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
carry on. Sorry.
Exactly. It's all about programming, essentially, isn't it? It's about predetermining and boxing everything in and categorizing and making something algorithmic and programmable, essentially.
Hmm.
And that's what statute does. And that's the kind of law that we're under at the moment. That's the way it's functioning. So it fundamentally goes against the principles of our constitution, because our constitution doesn't work like that. It's not meant to work like that. Okay, and that's what we can get into next, which is digging a little bit deeper, which is ultimately, who is the ultimate authority in our lives under constitutional law? Is it the people, or is it the government? That's the sort of and I've often posed that at the beginning.
And we're going at the end to deal with this, but if you have in your mind the question, okay, does Britain have a constitution? Don't worry, it's going to be dealt with, but let's just follow through here so that we understand before we get to that issue. Yep, carry on.
Absolutely. So that seems to be the ultimate question, because who in a society, it's either going to be that the people themselves define the liberties, their own liberties, or it's the government. Or you could put it another way. You could say that the people get to define the edges of acceptable behavior in their own community, and what isn't okay in their own community. So essentially it's either the people defining that, or it's the government. It's pretty simple, really.
It can't be both. So
it can't be both. And exactly, and there's no middle ground on that either. You can't fudge that issue. It's either one or the other. Yeah.
Although interestingly, I think you're going to tell us that it has been fudged somewhat, and not by the people.
Oh yes, magnificently. And in fact, increasingly, the more that you look into this, the more that's the way that we've lost our liberties. Because actually, it's really quite precise when we get into it. It's quite specific, and there really isn't room for maneuver. But they've had to create that room for maneuver by creating a level of confusion, this margin of error, this kind of gaslighting that's going on. If you can create a little bit of moral relativism in this and a little bit of mess, then actually you can create massive confusion.
And also basic ignorance. You can capitalize on basic ignorance. If you ask people that question, who has the ultimate power, the people or the government? I mean, obviously I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but if somebody asked me, I would have great difficulty in answering your question, because I would feel that the people should have the ultimate power, but the way things are, it appears that the government does. So, and then because I don't know my law and I don't know the appropriate history, I cannot answer the question. So yeah, really interesting.
And so actually I mean, you're absolutely right, and I was the same. And I remember for months, actually, when I got into this subject, I remember occasions, when I was waiting for my kids or something, I was sitting in a car park and I had an hour to kill or a couple of hours to kill, and I was working on this stuff, and I was thinking, this isn't making sense, because I can't make everything link up. And this was before I got to the magic mechanism that elevates the people over their government. Which is basically the principle of jury independence that we're going to come on to. Unless it is that the people have that authority over their government, you're always going to have a tyranny, because ultimately the government can start looking nice and can pretend and give you rights and say, well, you can do this and you can do that, and we are very benign and benevolent, and and everybody feels, oh, well, that's okay. We're in a system that's all right here. But you see, if they ultimately are in control and are providing your rights for you, rather than you starting with them in the first place, then you're always beholden to the government deciding whether that continues to be okay, or the government gets infiltrated by some special interest or powers and takes over from within, and then you've got a problem. Yeah. So it really matters, that question. Is it ultimately the people that have the ultimate power under the Constitution? Was the Constitution set up for the people to have that ultimate power? or was it not the case? And if it isn't the case, then we might as well, as I often say, we might as well pack up and go home now, because then we're automatically in a tyranny. And then we're into simply brute force on our numbers. And I mean, I think we're kind of on at that point anyway,
Well,
which
that's
is why I've been.
that's why this is really interesting and potentially very powerful and important. I think it's going to be a speed education game, because
Yes.
you know, if people understand it better, the more people who understand it. That's the issue with constitutional law, common law, is the ignorance, and so therefore you don't have the power of the people. But you know, here we are, we're trying, and I know you have been trying endlessly. So, and you know what? These things work. They work because tyranny is wrong and evil never prevails. So, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and people sense in themselves the principle of equity, which is that we're all equal before the law. You don't start society or a civilization even with a situation with certain people being more powerful than others. That's just a fundamental unfairness, and no, the people don't want that. You know, you want a situation where everybody is equal before the law, and if that is the case, if we're all equal before the law, then it's the people that decide the framework of morality within their community. Because ultimately, if you think about it, what we're really talking about when we talk about governance, what we're really talking about is deciding on what's okay and what isn't okay in our society, what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable morally. Yeah. And if you've got a special government, a special group deciding that for you, you've got a problem.
Well, that's the big issue here, isn't it? You know, as you said, some of the policies can seem sort of benign, as long as you don't have an authoritarian government. So if it's all put in place while everybody's behaving benevolently, then you know, and that's the issue with this kind of digital ID, social credit score. It's when people say to you, well, I don't have anything to hide, or it doesn't matter at the moment, the issue is that yeah, it clamps down on your liberties, and it may matter at some point. In fact, it very likely will matter at some point. So how do we use this knowledge that you're giving us? Firstly, obviously share it, and
most importantly,
yeah.
And it's really about understanding it quite deeply so that it sits within you, because it's not about technique, it's not about special knowledge or special processes. You have to understand it. You have to understand these concepts that we're going through now, because when you understand these concepts and about the fact that individual rights and equity and the fact that the government can't do what it likes, and it's the people that have to define the liberties of their own community. When you understand those concepts and you're picking apart that philosophy, it means that when you come to the point of having to be non-compliant in something, in some way, you're going to be firmer in that conviction. You're going to find it easier to do it, because if you've got doubts in your mind all the time that actually, you know, was our law set up correctly? How do we tread here? Because if the law actually wasn't set up correctly, and it gave government all these powers, and our entire constitutional system wasn't right, then that kind of changes the ball game a bit. And it, you know, but if you know that the rule of law was set up correctly to support that concept of individual rights and take government aside to tell it to get out of the way and serve the public, and that's the concept, then when it comes to non-compliance, because they're behaving unlawfully, the government that is, you're going to be stronger in your conviction. And that's the reason why I when I started this campaign, that I kept saying to people, look, you're not really in a position yet to be able to unearth some special little magic process that's immediately going to make the government just roll over and say, oh, you've sussed it, we're in trouble now. we're just going to have to, roll over and admit that everything that we've done, and it's not going to happen. They behave criminally because they are criminals, because there's a distorted mindset, an arrogant mindset that is being driven in people who haven't understood it within the system. So the relatively few criminals that may have nudged it that way over hundreds of years are hiding in the shadows. But the real danger lies in the layer of people who operate within government, who are rather like us. They're statists. Okay, they believe in the concept of authority, and they don't. And this is basically taking us towards the concept of order following, essentially. But we're jumping ahead a little bit. So what I should really define is how, just to be clear, how the original intended rule of law was supposed to work, which I think many people will have picked up from interviews and videos and things I've done already. But let's go over it very quickly.
It's actually really important. I read about it this morning. I think, yes, please go ahead, define it.
Yeah, no problem.
When you hear people talking about the rule of law, this is what they are referring to.
Yeah, this is what it is. So the rule of law under our Constitution essentially places the people in the ultimate authority over the legislature. They are the supreme legislature. Okay, now what does that mean? That means that the people are the final arbiter of law. They ultimately get to decide whether a piece of law is just or not. Okay, now that is a bit of a bombshell for those in the system. It's, so how does that work? So essentially what it means is that the jury, in trial by jury, is an expanded authority. It has expanded powers and rights. Okay, so and this is how I kicked this thing off with Neil Oliver, and I basically said that the jury has two purposes, not one. The first purpose we all know about, which is to judge the accused man in court, and to judge their innocence and guilt. We know that. But the important point is that you're doing that and weighing that against the piece of legislation that brought him into court in the first place. So it's a judgment of the legislation, the government created law itself. And it's essentially the people saying, is this just? Is it fair? And you're testing for right and wrong behavior. And you do that through your conscience and your understanding of principle. So we need to have principles. We want our law based on moral principle. Yeah. And that's what common law is, essentially. So the jury system in its full capacity is fundamentally a common law mechanism. That's what it is. And essentially you're shaping, and by the way, of course, that means that your law is dynamic to some extent, because it's going to be ultimately based on that principle of the people's thinking. Is this fair? Is this just? But having said that,
an example, just an anecdote, or just a parallel, so that people can just in case that's how people learn. Everybody's different in how they understand.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, this is ultimately about whether the defendant has caused any loss or harm to somebody. Is there an injured party? Yeah. So, for example, we've got laws in place about the taking of cannabis or something like that. Why? Because the government has just simply decided for us that that's not to be done. But in the taking of something like that, is there actually an injured party? Is there somebody that we've hurt in the process of doing it? Now, clearly, if in the doing of that, you then go on to in your state of mind, whether it's alcohol or whatever it is, that you then go and create an injury to somebody, that's a different matter. But the act of taking something like that, a substance, is decided by government not to be okay. But that's a rule or a regulation. That's not equitable. And it's fundamentally unconstitutional, because it's not about principle. Is that individual actually harming anybody? No, it's none of your business, government. It's they actually are just doing something that they wish to do privately under their own individual rights. Yeah. So if that came before a jury that understood its full its full rights and its full power, they would return a not guilty verdict, because
Okay.
there's no injured party.
Okay.
Yeah,
I understand
see what I
better
mean? Does
now.
that
Thank you.
does that example
Yeah.
sort of work on
No,
that one?
that works. That works brilliantly. I just I wanted to clarify my understanding, and that has done it. So carry on. You're
Yeah.
going to
So
take us, and now we understand that. How can we apply that?
yeah. Okay, so going back to the original rule of law and just to describe it again and how it works. So the most important thing is that whenever anybody is considered a problem in communities, there's something that's been flagged up, they come before a court, and then it's ultimately the people, the jury of their peers, that decide whether that's okay or not. And if it isn't, if a piece of legislation brought them into court, and they still return a not guilty verdict, that could cause annulment. And that what that means clearly, though, is a lot of people are thinking that means, oh, it just automatically gets wiped off the statute book. It doesn't actually. It just means it's annulled in that case.
Oh, right.
But then there's a further protracted process that could work, where if a piece of legislation is clearly being shown not to be working, and it's constantly being annulled in cases because it can't be shown that there is any mens rea, that means malice aforethought, any malicious intent. That's what you're looking for. That's what a jury is looking for. And if that's constantly absent, or there are other reasons why that piece of legislation is just clearly not functioning as it should, then you could, the raw protracted process would be a private prosecution, where you would prosecute people in government that actually brought that piece of legislation about. So that we don't need to go into that now. It's getting into a bit more detail, but that's the essentially the process. Now, in addition to that, the head of state, the first among equals, as we like to call them, which is your most senior public servant of the land, should then decide ultimately on legislation that comes through Parliament. So government is allowed to create law, legislation, rules that might clarify a concerning sort of red flag point, where somebody is doing something in society that might be considered dangerous. It's still ultimately the decision of the jury, but the statute is creating a condition, if you like, or a standard by which, hang on a second, we're a bit concerned about you, we need to haul you into court before the people. And if they think that that's all fine, no problem, you can go again. But it's a test point. That's the way, in a sense, that statutory law should function. It's not really law. It's just it's guidance. They're guidance points. And if you've breached a guidance point, then essentially it's a way of saying you need to come into court. Yeah. And under the proper rule of law, that's really what statutory law should be. It's nothing more than that, and it can't punish. It doesn't have the power to punish by itself. The power to punish always lies with your peers, with the people. Yeah. Now, that statutory law, it's able to be created by government, but it ultimately goes up to the head of state, and the head of state has a right to refuse assent to that piece of legislation. And they should, and they have a responsibility to act on that and to use it. So
in our country, or in the United Kingdom, that would be the monarch.
Quite correct. Exactly.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Sorry, just because I am so new to all of this, double check your facts. So we're talking about our king. And let's say we're talking about legislation that creeps in to do with the 15-minute cities. So we put it in that context, and then you carry on for me.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. So and there are actually a few steps along the way, because the legislature, which is one branch of government, consists of a couple of layers under the head of state. So you've got the lower house, which in this country is the House of Commons, and then the upper house is the House of Lords, which has pretty much been attacked mainly by the Blair government and sort of lobotomized and taken apart. But the upper house is meant to be a check on the lower house for legislation that's coming through, and they're essentially going to look at it and think, in the longer term, actually, does this piece of legislation work? Does it make sense? No, it doesn't. We're going to kick it back to you. You can amend it and do what you like, etc. But then ultimately, it's meant to go up from the House of Lords to the head of state to give it royal assent. So you've kind of got three layers in the legislature, so there are lots of checks and balances that are meant to be there, but all of those have now been captured, pretty much. So
Except you're maybe going to tell us well, I don't know if you are, but I mean, you obviously have to take a position on what you think the king is thinking. That's an unusual state of affairs to find yourself having to work out what you think that the monarch is thinking, but that's where we are, isn't it? So I mean,
yes.
What do you think?
So, well, yes, and we're facing that rather interesting coronation at the moment, and of course, as you may know, we've sent a letter out to the Duke of Norfolk, who inherits the responsibility of state functions, state affairs, state events, and the coronation is potentially a real problem, because that's the head of state ultimately taking responsibility as that most senior public servant. It's a promise to make sure that his government, which is what it is, he's responsible for that government, conducts itself properly according to constitutional law. Okay, so what that's basically saying is that the higher form of law, which is over the entire government framework, is constitutional law. That's the system of law that can't be messed with and can't be amended by government itself, because the whole idea with it is that it frames government and keeps it to a certain set of standards. Yeah. And therefore, the Constitution requires the head of state to make that promise, and it requires all the layers underneath that to take an oath, if you like, to that. Yeah, you can see how it works. It's fairly simple once you understand what that is. Now, what that in effect means is that it's leaving the people in a free landscape to do what they like. Okay, and if you really wanted to go to extremes, you could say actually that leaves the people to live their anarchy. And we mean anarchy in the true sense of the word, which is basically freedom to conduct themselves properly under natural law, to be self-masters, essentially.
And is this sort of like, if you were really, just trying to simplify it, but to give some sort of statement regarding it, just to do no harm?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. So you're basically saying that the only conditions that you are forced to live under is that which is based in natural law, universal law, which is the essential principle of not harming others. You're not creating loss or harm to other people. And so our common law courts, which are meant to be in an independent judiciary, essentially, are run by the people. It's the people deciding it. The government is independent of that. It gets over to the side and does its thing. And what is its thing? Its thing is basically to provide services to the people, to assist in the people living that anarchy. Yeah, that's really all it's there for. And if it steps outside that set of standards, that constitutional law, if it goes beyond it, it effectively delegitimizes itself. Yeah, it becomes unlawful, in which case it doesn't exist. It's just not meant to be there.
That's very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah.
That's the way that we should be seeing it. That's the way that people should be seeing it. Now, things have got so far out of kilter. And we'll get into why that's happened a little bit later. But effectively, the new distorted rule of law, if you think about it in contrast, is that they've increased the power of Parliament, which they did over a period of about 100 years, between the sort of mid-1600s, maybe a bit earlier, to the sort of early to mid-1700s. It was about 100 years. Give or take a bit, but that was the period in which we saw an enormous growth of the power and scope of Parliament. and effectively what that drove us towards was not a direct rule of law where the people get to not just influence but actually control the character of our community, the moral character of our community. Instead, it was being done by our representatives. So we introduce a system of representation, and we have a system of party politics that comes into play. And what it also changes is, rather than have that complete landscape of freedom by simply defining what is not acceptable, you're actually starting to move towards a much more codified, you can do this, you can't do that, you can do this, you can do that and that, but you can't do that and that and that, and you can, and everything becomes like listed essentially and codified. And when you're in that situation, you're in real trouble, because you can never get to the end of that list, and everything is predefined. It's not about morals and principle anymore. It's about order following. Yes.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into a new distorted form of a rule of law, where everything is now about following orders. And there are some contradictions here, because of course everybody saw Nuremberg as a really good thing, because what it was highlighting was the fact that following orders, regardless of how powerful the people that order comes from, you can't get out of your responsibilities, which are ultimately not about following orders. It's something else. There's a morality that ultimately that you have to follow. You can't get away with following orders. It's going to get you into real trouble. Okay, now in our new rule of law, our distorted rule of law, the order following falls into three categories. The people are following orders when they follow statute, because they're doing it through fear.
Absolutely. People don't dissent because they fear punishment. And even that doesn't have to be being put in prison. It can just be restrictions, or it can even be social punishment,
Yes.
Being shunned, for not wearing a mask, say.
That's it. Exactly it. Yeah. So you've got these predetermined rules and regulations, and everybody just follows it through fear, ultimately. So that's the first kind of order following. Second kind of order following is where we've got a distorted trial by jury system. So people will think, well, we've still got trial by jury. Yeah, but it's a watered down system of trial by jury, because the people are not told of their power to be independent of the legislation, be above it. They're not told that. They've been educated over a very long period of time that they just simply have to follow orders. Why? Because they are told that, yeah, you get to decide the facts, but you don't get to decide the law or the punishment, or even the admissibility of evidence. Yeah. So in a true common law jury, they get to decide on everything. They get to decide the law, the justice of the law itself, the facts, the admissibility of evidence, and even the punishment as well. All of those aspects.
Really interesting as well.
Which is really powerful, isn't it? But in our new rule of law, they are told that's not your job. You're not to do that, which effectively means you're taking orders from the judge on law. So that's the second form of order following. Okay. The third form of order following, of course, is through the executive, which of course is the police and the prison service, and the military, of course, as well. So you have order followers there too, and they've got some serious things to think about as well, because following orders is always immoral. It's never virtuous to follow orders. It might be that you still decide to do the thing that's being suggested to you. Yes,
but you need to be making the decision for yourself. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And then we're back to the two questions, I suppose, which is, do we have a constitution? And if we do have a constitution, which I hope you're going to tell us that we do, then again, how do we apply this wonderful information to change what is going on at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we have a situation. Yeah, it's not good news.
Mm.
The situation we have at the moment is that the government is behaving outside its lawful constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So it's gone beyond it. So it's acting criminally already.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. There are
Just
huge
by virtue of going beyond it, it doesn't actually matter what they're engaging in. They could be criminals for just doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so exactly. So this question inevitably comes up in people's minds. Okay, well, how do we apply the Constitution?
Mm.
Well, we're trying to apply it, but they won't let us do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and the reason why they won't let us do it is because largely the people in the system of governance don't understand it either.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have is a kind of is a momentum, is an uncontrollable momentum and a trajectory in which government has just is out of control.
Mm-hmm.
Because the people that work within it are people like us that don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we reverse that? We can't just apply it because they'll just argue and just say, well, that's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
We have to educate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why, this campaign, commonlawconstitution.org, is really nothing more at this stage than an education campaign
Mm-hmm.
to expose the way and clarify in people's minds the way in which the rule of law is supposed to work under our lawful constitution.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all we're doing. It's not a
I
political
think it's just an exceptionally worthy and hopeful cause. I'm really delighted to participate, even to the degree of just sharing your information on my platform. I feel uplifted, by the possibility that something might work, because I have children and something needs to work here.
Yeah, no, sure.
That being said, the time constraints are, we're working here against the clock. So
Yep.
and I gather you guys are trying to get as much coverage as possible, speak to as many people as possible. How's that going?
It's good. It seems to be good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite seeing the level of activity that I would like to see, because I think the only way. So there are two things that we have to achieve actually here.
Mm-hmm.
We have to wake the freedom movement up
Mm-hmm.
to this message, because I don't actually think the freedom movement have understood it either.
Mm-hmm.
It's tended to be.
Interesting, speaking to Aman Jabi, just personal conversations. So, but I don't think he would mind. I know that this is something that is close to his heart. He is also pursuing the American Constitution and an accurate understanding of it as
Yes,
a
great.
foundational step to
Yeah,
actually repairing the problems in America.
yeah,
So it's very, very it adds weight and power to hear that
it is.
two groups of people independently of one another have come
Yeah,
to the same conclusion.
yeah,
And that makes me think that, you have this, like you said, a kind of potential for a groundswell. If it's happened independently in two different countries, and he's not alone in his thinking, and you're not alone in your thinking, there are people with you, then these things, like videos going viral, you know sometimes things just reach a sort of critical point, and that's
yes,
it, they spark.
yes.
So
That's exactly it, and it's about the tipping point. And the only thing that's going to cause that tipping point is sufficient care and interest in your individual rights.
mhm,
When the light bulb moment happens, and you finally get it, and it starts to sit more deeply in you,
mhm,
then you're stronger. It's at
mhm,
that point that your non-compliance and your sovereignty starts to come to the surface,
mhm,
and you start to realize, look, it's really quite obvious. In a sense, it doesn't matter about the detail of the Constitution, but we'll come on to that anyway in a minute.
mhm,
Ultimately, what really matters is that this is the only way in which any kind of nation can exist
mhm,
under natural law.
mhm,
There is no other way that has ever existed on this planet
mhm,
other than, and let's break the Constitution down into three principles. It's just three things. It's all it is. is you have a natural law tribunal in which the people decide on justice.
Mm-hmm.
You have, and they're the highest authority.
Mm-hmm.
You have maybe a legislature, if you want it, but you might not even need that, where you create a system of rules for clarification in which people come before the jury if they breach those. Yeah. And the third thing is that you have a head of state who is basically nothing more than I mean, you could replicate this in the village in the Amazon. And they would be a wise elder or something, you know, something the equivalent.
And effectively, I think they probably did before the Western man intervened, did replicate this in the Amazon, because it makes sense as a way to live, as a tribe, as a clan, as a community.
That's it, exactly. And the important thing is that head of state or that wise elder takes a promise in perpetuity to keep that entire system in place. And that fundamentally the people are ultimately in charge of defining the liberties in their community. That's it. That's really what our constitution is.
Though, to the letter that you wrote and the coronation that you were speaking of. So now that we've got all of that knowledge, can you go back there and talk to us again or more about the letter that you've written and the potential that you see?
Yeah, so I mean, we've simply raised the concern that clearly our current king, and whatever your feelings on Charles, you know, because some people can't abide the royal family, and others actually quite like them. You know, I mean, Charles is probably is he somebody who's just been duped? I'm just putting it out there. That's all. Is he somebody that's being controlled, or is in some way blackmailed, or I don't know. I'm just putting these questions there, you know, or is he absolutely fully knowing what's going on here? And I don't know. There's a range of possibilities, but it doesn't matter. Either way, if he is going to step into that role and be the first among equals and be the most senior public servant of the land, which is what he would be under our law, that means that first and foremost, you have to protect the liberties of the people under that customary common law that's built into our constitution. Now, if you're doing that, that totally contradicts all the things that you've been doing, where you've been getting in bed with like the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum and any other foreign powers and influences that are in contravention to our constitutional law. His first responsibility is to the laws and customs of our country and the liberties of the people. That's his primary responsibility. You can't have both. It's a complete contradiction.
So we can't sign the pandemic treaty, theoretically. We can't sign it because it absolutely contravenes our basic fundamental constitutional law.
Totally correct.
Okay. So we're going to sign it anyway, though. No, I don't mean that, but I mean, that's where we are, you know.
Yes.
And that's why. So is there have you had any feedback? Is anybody at any kind of level coming back to you?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet. Okay.
Nothing yet. No, we've got there's another interesting development actually that somebody else actually in that world of the Duke of Norfolk has also
welcome to the world of the Duke of Norfolk. Who knows what goes on?
Yeah. I'm being a bit cagey because I don't want to give information away in names, but there's another letter that's gone. And that's quite interesting because it's saying the same things that we are, basically. Very well written letter by an individual who I won't say who that is.
Fantastic. So it's currently a two-pronged attack, and may it become a multi-pronged attack, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. And it all adds weight because it gets very awkward for them. Because really, in a sense, what we're doing here is simply, in a way, a revealing, if you like, of the way that it's actually supposed to operate. I'm not. We're not trying to lead. And we're not trying to create a manifesto, and it's not political.
Mm-hmm.
All we're
Well,
doing
you're not
is
Jordan
saying, look,
Peterson. You're not going to go up against the World Economic Forum and create a different kind of global cabal.
exactly, spot on. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. What we're doing is we're just re-exposing. We're saying to the people, look, this has been hidden. This has been concealed. This is how we're going to create some clarity as to how your constitution was supposed to work. And by the way, here's this hidden mechanism of trial by jury and the way that it's supposed to work. And it all, when you put all the dots together, it all shows that it's you guys in charge. It's the people in charge. Just compare that with the way it's operating now. And now we're giving you some nuggets of information, something a bit more solid to rest on. Yeah. And here it is. We're just going to give this to you. What are you going to do with it?
I've always been of that mind, really, actually, myself, that I don't know how to fix this. But I do know that if enough people knew what was going on, it would be fixed, because nobody wants it. So
spot on. Actually, you've just said that. Probably the best that I've heard anyone else say. You've basically defined what common law constitution is trying to do. Yeah, we're not going to fix this for you. It's really down to you guys, the people, to fix it. We're just exposing it and showing you and giving you some clarity, because you've been missing this and because you've not been educated over it, quite deliberately, by the way. It's not your fault entirely, but here it is. And I say entirely because there's some interesting things we could get into there if we've got time. I don't know how long you want to go on for.
We're not on a time limit.
Okay, so we could get into some quite interesting, deeper things if you wanted to do that. But essentially what you've just said is great. It's basically, we're not leading you. Here's the magic material, the things that will make a difference for you. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to run with it or not? It's just, and actually that's quite scary. That's quite frightening for people.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's frightening because when you say we're not going to impose anything on you, that's true in the context of what you're trying to share the information. But you ultimately are a member of a community or a member of a family, and you are also one of those people who's going to have to decide what you're going to do with it. So it's not sort of as though, sat there saying to other people, it's only you who's got to go through this really difficult process. It's also us, just because we know it, or just because you know it and I'm coming to know it, doesn't mean that, immediately my life is going to change. In fact, if you're really honest about it, it's human to understand that you need a certain amount of social everybody needs to congeal. I'm not getting the right word, but you need enough
absolutely
enough people who understand and agree with you before you are empowered to go further with it. And then you're going to end up with presumably little areas of the world, like your part of the country, where people know a bit more. And but as we said, all of these things can permeate very quickly once you get to a point, and that's what you're trying to do.
I think so. Yeah, I absolutely correct. And I think that if people cared enough about it, you see, because often I ask the question, actually, do you really want to be free? Because actually, this is getting into some deeper stuff now, because actually when you're really free, you're also absolutely authentic, raw and exposed, because
and
you have to be
totally responsible.
Yes. Totally, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Which I find more scary than authentic, raw, and exposed. The end of line responsibility. The buck stops with you, and I think that is something which has been conditioned. Not just the belief that that's the way it should be, but also the belief that we're actually capable of that. Because when you take away that fervent, that's the way it is, or that's the way it should be, you lose your faith that you actually can do it on your own. If you could do it on your own, you'd be doing it on your own. So the fact that the system isn't set up such must mean that there's some that you're not actually capable. So so what do other people say when you tell them, do you really want, or you ask them, do you really want to be free? What kind of responses do you get?
Yes, it varies. You get complete confusion and go, "Why would I not want to be free?" And it brings up other questions like, "Well, what does that ultimately freedom mean? What does it, So then when you get into that, and others will clock it straight away and go, "Yeah, that no," because actually, I mean, briefly, what it really is and this is how this situation has come about, because our condition of enslavement, which is, let's be honest, that's what it is. It looks nice on the surface, but it belies a definite enslavement, because you only have to go a little bit deeper and start tinkering and questioning, and then we all know where we're absolutely kind of boxed in, and it is a decorative enslavement, I would argue. But when you go into that and you start deeply analyzing what that is, it really actually what's happened is that we've done it to ourselves, because what we've effectively done is we've outsourced huge sort of portions of our lives for convenience and comfort. And actually what's happened there is that the government has come in and filled that void, and just done it for us. So government is enormous, and government should be really small. In fact, we should be doing more of this stuff, and it should be in private hands, and we just trade amongst ourselves. And you could even say, well, bin collection is just you put it out to the people around your local businesses, and you can have a varying business collection. It's the same with health. Health. The NHS has become a right old religion with people, but actually under an anarchist system. It's not really a system at all. You can't have a system of anarchy. It's an absence of a system, actually. But in a way, you wouldn't have an NHS, because actually everybody gets to be, if they want to be, good at health and healing, and if you find somebody that you trust, you trade with them on that basis. It's now that's a long way away.
And people are scared, though, I think, of losing what they perceive to be liberties, which would be, living within the restrictions of a community.
Yes.
Means that you need to play your part, just like you do in a family. It's difficult to get time away from your role. If you do, as a parent, you need to negotiate that time, and you need to feel the balance or the guilt about whether or not that was time well spent. And the same with, if you commit to a community, then everybody will get to a place where the dependency is such that you have a role to fulfill, and you can't really get out of that for too long, which means that flying to another country and spending time there, on holiday, or not participating in something because you want to you want to stay in your bed, or just whatever. It's a really completely different way of thinking.
Yeah, it is. And we're a long way from it. It's something. I mean,
do you think it's something people would ever want, or do you think that there's a way to balance what we have?
Oh yes, they would, I think, but they have to get there. It's going to happen. See, fixing this situation is going to be massively incremental. We've gone so far off, and everything has become so centralized. And when you centralize things, you're removing them. You're making them very distant from the place where we are. So the more centralized, controlled things become, and let's not forget that they want global governance. So the more centralization that you get, the more distant those processes become from you. They're not come from you at the end. They're not real to you anymore. You can't take personal responsibility for it, and you don't know the people who are taking responsibility for putting those things into effect. And that's just going more and more that way. And
you can see the illness, people talk about I suppose addiction, or various forms of substance and alcohol abuse and depression, and all of these things. They sort of mark them as forms of illness, but really, I don't know, I perceive them as being sort of expressions of unwellness within the context of the system that we have created. People are they're unable to cope, not because they are unable to cope, because they are actually wonderful people, and they could cope if you know, the world and the system that we lived in was set up to be according to principles which didn't offend their inner being and their morality, you know. And because
Yes.
it's not, people get sick, and you can, you know, yeah. So
Yeah.
we, again, that descent, that, you know, so we have to, as you Cindy Niles often uses the word incrementalism in one way, and she's talking about how they are incrementally taking things. And it's nice to
Yes.
hear somebody talk about how we could incrementally take them back.
Yes.
You know,
Take them back again. And in a sense, them taking things incrementally from us is because we're incrementally allowing them to give that away. We're giving them it away, essentially. And we're doing it because we don't notice that we're doing it. And this is going to get into some quite deep stuff, because it's to do with the honesty in ourselves that's required to spot our own lazy behavior in this. Yeah, so this is getting into a deep level of consciousness, because all of this is wrapped up in some quite esoteric concepts. And when you get into natural law, you're getting into the area of understanding the true nature of morality in the universe. And I mean, if you want to go here, we can do it quite quickly and briefly, but essentially, it's the fact that right and wrong behavior in the universe is absolute. It is objective. Okay, so and what does that mean? It basically means that right behavior exists in the universe, and it is defined. But it's actually defined as wrong behavior. So it's the barriers that are defined within the universe, not what is okay. Okay, what is okay is shown to us by what you shouldn't do. Okay, and essentially what that is that when we engage in wrong behavior, which is harming others, we get consequences that are delivered back to us. And essentially that is karma. That's the universe delivering back to us.
Briefly watching something last night about Tesla and 369 and 8, and watching the infinity symbol go around, you know, like the number 8,
yes.
and the delivery of karma and everything going and coming back to you. It's
right.
So interesting sometimes, isn't it, that when something comes up, it comes up again. You know, I like that.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah. So
and it's quite dispassionate as well. It's not
yes,
it's
not that someone's
it's not
standing
punishment
outside of someone else and saying that they're wrong. It is simply that, you know, to behave one way will derive ultimate, you know, positive
consequences,
benefit, and to behave another way, and that exists every time you take any form of action. And it's happening to everyone, though, not just you.
That's it. So, that's exactly it. So when it's often defined in religious dogma in the sense of this is punishment for you, but in fact it's actually about us learning not to mess with the universe in the wrong way. That's the in a sense the probably easiest way of putting it. Or
even maybe that the universe just it's out of balance if you do that. Like it just has to rebalance itself. So I don't think it even like advertently hurts you. It's almost like, you know, it just has to be this way, otherwise, you know.
Well, I think what it is that when you're acting out of alignment with the universe, essentially what you're doing is you're I mean, Jordan Peterson put it this way actually in one of his videos a long time ago. It's taking the fabric of the universe, and when you lie, essentially you're distorting it. You're distorting the universe into a shape that it doesn't want to go in, and it won't stay like that.
It won't go.
It will ultimately snap back at you, and the snapping back at you is nasty. It's painful when it happens. It doesn't necessarily happen immediately.
No.
It will happen down the line. But essentially that is the way that the most useful way in understanding morality is that you're a little bit like a child messing with a dangerous toy. And you're going to get, you know, it's like, I mean, I remember doing electronics.
You'll get your fingers burned. if you
Getting your fingers
yeah,
burnt, or yeah,
but
it's exactly it.
and you learn, and if you are, you know, not if you're clever, because it's the wrong word, but if you're astute, if you are desirous of the not living with these negative consequences, then you begin to shape life such that, and also obviously because you love your children, you want to show
Yes,
them how to do that,
yes,
because you don't want to see them fall down, you know.
yes.
um so and then obviously the more people who are doing this, the better our world
Yeah,
will become.
that's exactly it. So the collective consciousness then comes into alignment much more with the universe. So our consciousness is defined essentially by how closely we align our behavior to that which the universe has defined within itself as morally right. Yeah, and we do that according to conscience, consciousness, conscience. It's the conscience that we use it, of course, in the jury. Yeah. And
Yes,
so
yes.
and so this engaging in our constitution, coming back to the jury, has within it mechanisms that actually teach us to become more conscious, because we're using that moral principle, we're using that conscience, and we're being honest with ourselves. Yeah, and it all comes down to that. And I mean, this can get even deeper into things like the nature of lying and our relationship with truth, because we actually lie to ourselves all the time, me included. And you know, we all go through this stuff. But this is the shadow work that Carl Jung talked about, which is that you have to face your own internal lies, and we do it in really subtle ways. You know, we do it by justifying things, we do it by exaggerating things. You know, we say, well, let me, you know, in my own mind, I did that thing, which is probably not ideal, but really I did it because of this. You know, it's a way of explaining away things, and we're doing it all the time. And that's why when you get into this material, especially when you start looking at
And there's
natural
also
law.
the possibility, just to interject there, sorry, that when you live within a system that is unhealthy, you're
Yes,
being presented with these opportunities, if you like, for that to
yes,
happen so much more often than you would be
yes,
if you were in a healthy society.
exactly. And actually you're getting onto there the business of, when you're not, it's not just about being honest and yourself, it's also about calling out dishonesty around us as well when you spot it. So if there's immorality being conducted, we have to call it out, because what you're doing there is you're jumping to the defense of truth. Yeah. And this is all about consciousness. I mean, we're getting into some really deep stuff here, but this is what underpins everything. Natural law is what underpins everything to do with a system of equity in our law, our practicalities, and our everyday stuff. We have to go deeper into this to start looking at, well, what actually is our consciousness like individually, and what is it like in the collective? And it's, well, if you listen to people like Mark Passio, you'll realize that it's really shocking. Actually, it's really bad. We're in a bad state of consciousness, and that's come about as a cycle. We've been lazy, then it gets incrementally worse. We then interact with that system that then is created from it, and we end up taking the lazy path again, because we don't want to face temporary discomfort by facing it and dealing with uncomfortable truths, and it just gets progressively worse. So we're now in a situation where we've got a hell of a lot to row back with, heck of a lot.
And I'd said at the beginning that, you know, it matters whether we in Britain actually have a constitution, and is there any debate about whether there is one. But having had the conversation, and although I think we should have a look at that, I almost feel like it doesn't matter, because if we
Correct.
don't, we
Yes.
should, because it's the only way to live. Yeah. So
Yes.
that's really,
Yes.
really interesting.
So final point on that, you're absolutely right. You know, even if it turned out that the English constitution wasn't really a thing, but it is, and I can go into that in a minute, and it never actually took root and it wasn't set up correctly. The point is that the magic that's in it, because the intention was that it was based on these natural law principles, is so fundamental and so important that if we were to have a new system put in place now, at least now the people understand what the pillars are, the central pillars of that system should be. So by studying what it is, what it could have been if it wasn't, we are now in a strong position to know going forward that we won't have the wool pulled over our eyes again. Because if enough people in society understand these moral principles and how a community should be set up, we'll be okay. But
I
as
think
you
as
say,
well, what you have on your side is that I really truly believe that most people do understand, because they are constantly dealing with having to suppress what they know, and it makes
yes,
them unwell, and it causes, you know, it means that they have to lie, and it means that they have to deal with all sorts of associated stuff, and they know it. And so and they're so uncomfortable with it that the only escape is, you know, to just watch Netflix, or you
yeah,
know, to
yeah,
just to literally not think, because you can't think all of this stuff back to a good point in a way. So but I think people actually know, they crave an opportunity to put it right, because
yeah.
nobody wants to live, even you know, even if they weren't taking it as far as they're going, nobody is even doing terribly well the way we are, you know.
No,
So
exactly.
it's a powerful, it's a wonderful and powerful conversation we've had. I hope other people enjoy it as much as I'm enjoying it. And it's not over yet, because I am going to do this thing where I attempt to screen share with everybody, just so that we can put, as we said, the pillars in place. So, Will, there is the UK Parliament's sort of definition of what the Magna Carta is. Magna Carta was issued in June 1215 and was the first document to put into writing the principle that the king and his government was not above the law. I think
Yeah,
that's sort of
it
fairly
wasn't actually.
okay. Do
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah, no, I mean that's not too troubling what they've said there. The problem is there are a
Okay.
lot of distortions in the UK Parliament website. There's a lot of things that aren't quite right.
Well,
But
I was
that
going to
was
say
broadly
to you,
right.
you know, if you look up here as sources of information, we have the UK Parliament Wikipedia.
Yes, yes.
So, like, I'm not expecting this to be entirely true. And I
No,
wanted to sort of put it to you. So
but that's
this is
quite
good.
positive actually. That they actually got that what they got right there actually is that they are at least tipping their hat to the authority and importance of the 1215 Magna Carta, which is great. And I mean, just to clarify this for you, because you're absolutely right, it's good for people to know this. I mean, certainly as far as I'm concerned, and those around me who have put jury independence and trial by jury at the centre of our constitutional understanding, what we're basically saying is that the 1215 Magna Carta is our constitution. Okay.
Okay.
And why is that? It's because it's really the last document that isn't legislation, because that's a key distinction. Yeah. There was a treaty that was not really a treaty, it was a promise, really, a one-sided promise on the part of the head of state to say, right, I'm keeping this all in place. That's essentially what it is. Now, it didn't start with the Magna Carta. So our constitution existed before then. But what it was a restatement of our constitution, the 1215 Magna Carta. And in a way, it's the last one that we can really point to as an authority underpinning that. And the reason for that is because almost everything else, I think, bar none, is in some form an issue, or has some issues underpinning it that are surrounding it that are problematic, that they're either contravening itself of the principles of Magna Carta itself, or their statutory law. So a lot of people point to the Bill of Rights. And I have a problem with the Bill of Rights. So does Ken Dudney, who a lot of this work, and Lysander Spooner had a problem with it as well, who a lot of our research is based on, not only because it's statutory law, for a start, and you can't have the government, which is, the government creates statutory law. So you can't use statutory law as the authority behind your constitution, because that's basically saying, okay, so you're saying that the government can
Creates
make
the fundamental
amendments
law
in legislation and affect the constitution that they are meant to be bound by. No, that's a contradiction. It's a completely illogical contradiction. So that's why I go back to 1215 Magna Carta, because it's pure.
Okay.
Now, just to be specific, it's only about 4 or 5 articles in it. It's not the whole thing.
Yeah, no, that's
because
interesting.
there's some weird stuff in there as well about women and how they should behave and also stuff like that. And that's not really what the Constitution is. The Constitution is essentially a few articles. It's Article 39.
Sorry, I'm thinking about how many ways I probably contravene the Magna Carta sort of definition of the best practice for women. But anyway, carry on. So the important ones are.
So Article 39 is critical. Article 40. Article 61 is interesting. That's about rebellion. But there are some things with that are very interesting indeed. It's a very long article, actually. And there are some other bits and pieces. But I mean, 39 and 40, in a way, are really key and really central. And also,
that's a recommendation. If anybody is watching that, and I'm certainly going to go ahead and do it after our conversation, have a look at Articles 39 and 40 of the Magna Carta. Yeah.
And 61 is good
and
too.
61. And maybe we'll come back. And was 61 the rebellion one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back and talk about that.
Yeah.
I like a bit of rebellion.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, the important thing is that also is that the things that are expressed in 39 and 40 were expressed prior to Magna Carta as well, in very similar wording as well, incidentally. And 200 years before Magna Carta in Europe, Emperor Conrad as well said the same thing, essentially that the people through the jury have the power. That's essentially what he was saying. It was almost the same text. And then if it goes back even further, it goes back to the ancient Athenian constitution in Greece, but importantly early Greece, prior to Plato and Socrates. It was before that. It was actually the time of Cleisthenes, around 508 to 507 BC. And interestingly, he was an aristocrat, actually. But he was basically, it was about exousia rights, which is basically making the people the final arbiter of law. That's really
so really kind of to summarize what you're saying there, it is just simply that this understanding that this is the way we should live is ancient. It's ancient wisdom because it's best practice. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Okay.
And the powers that be have basically had an endless war against it. And actually, the English history, particularly since the Norman conquest, is all about that struggle. It's about the struggle between, in a way, common law, the principles of common law, and which is based on natural law and our understanding of the universe, versus a form of Roman law. So when you frame it like that, you can start looking at our history, and you can start to think, okay, so we've got the Roman influences, we've got the it starts to get really interesting when you start to put it in that context. It's all about what form of law do you want? What form of constitution do you want? Ultimately, that's what the English history is all about. It's a tussle between those things.
And here we are in our own massive tussle. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this to a close just now, because it's been so fabulous. And I'm going to ask you if you will come back and we can talk about the specific articles, and we can talk about where you were going at the end there. We start fresh for people who've watched this one, and then, follow on so that they can have a wee break to digest what we've just talked about, because it's massive, it's powerful, it's hopeful. And that's, those are all wonderful things. And I don't want to lose that, that upside.
Definitely,
even though I really enjoy conversations about history and philosophy and politics, and what I wanted to say though is, from your email to me, it comes from the New Chartist movement. Is that the website that you want to direct people to?
No, that's just my email. It's still based around that movement, because we set up a whole load of email addresses around that. So no, the main website is commonlawconstitution.org.
Let me just come over here and sorry, right, I'm not you guys are just watching me and I'm fanning around with the screen. I do apologize. Right, we're back here and I want to screen share, and I'm going to go over here and press that button, and let's just get it up. So www.commonlawconstitution.org.
Constitution.org.
And let's have a look at the homepage just so that people are familiar with it. There you go, guys. This is where you need to go in order to follow
So if
up
you
and follow
scroll
through.
down a little bit,
Sure.
the first thing that you'll hit there, actually, it is held on the New Chartist Movement website, actually, but that's a downloadable document that is, it's about 12, 13 pages long. And that's actually a more detailed statement or explanation of the Constitution. It deals with all the traps and the tricks that have been played along the way. And it's got some academic references in it as well, if you want it. But it's quite easily explained. It's quite an easy explanation, and I've typeset it in quite loosely, so it's quite nice and easy to read. So that's that one. If you scroll down a little bit further, Tamora, you'll get to this one, which is five steps to understanding the Constitution. And you just open up those little bits, and it just goes through some of the things that we've talked about today in pretty short form.
And that can help people if they want to share the information with somebody else. You know, it's quite a lot to share in terms of actually sort of, I'm sure it took you a while to work out how to logically present it.
Yes.
You know,
months, years, points, actually.
Yeah. So if other people want to talk, then they can use that, because that's a kind of a basis for it. And then here, I guess we have that's
just lots of articles and thoughts and writings and things like that. Actually, if you go down to the resources, or if you go into the drop down at the top, you can see that there are further bits and pieces. If you go down to resources, just come down a little bit further. Yeah, you've got a frequently asked questions, question and answers thing there. You've also got at the top on the right hand side, you've got useful quotations to support our understanding of the Constitution and trial by jury. And that's devastating. If you scroll down there, you've got some really, you know, Blackstone, Churchill, David Hume, historian, Gilbert. You've got all sorts of quotations backing up the things that we're saying. So I would say to people who have got a good memory and they've learnt texts before, just learn one or two of those quotes and just bring them out. I mean, wow.
And start the conversation.
Yes.
Have the conversation. If you're watching this, turn it off and just go over and speak to the next person you see, even if it's in the supermarket queue, and say, did you know that we have a constitution? And even if we don't, we should. And see what they say to you, and go from there. Or even the question, you know, do you want to be free? You know, I'm just trying to think of openers for people, because you know, walking up to somebody, just go and say, you know, I was just listening to Tamara and Will on YouTube. I don't know if you heard it, but you should listen to it if you haven't. It's about constitutional law. There you go. And hopefully they'll say, what's that? And you can say,
And just the last point actually is to pique people's interest. The easiest thing to do is to create some quite jarring statements that cause contradictions in people's minds. And there are some beautiful examples on common law constitution under the memes section.
Okay.
Where you're saying, do you think King Charles can actually lawfully take his coronation oath, given what he's actually supporting? That's just throwing it out there, you know. It's just you could have quite a lot of fun with these statements. But that's a place to go, definitely.
Wonderful. So check out the memes section as well. And also, hopefully Will's going to come back and we're going to talk more about this same subject, because it's a beautiful subject. It really is. And it's lovely. Do you know, your enthusiasm for it absolutely shines through. And it's so sweet. You get excited when you're sort of coming to the main point of explaining something. And, you know, you're very theatrical, but in a nice way, not inauthentically, but like obviously sincerely, genuinely, you know, behind this. And that is lovely to see as well, some passion, because we you know, we need a bit more of that going about. And, you know, sometimes passion from one person you know, incites it in others. So thank you so much for your time, Will, and hopefully speak to you again very soon.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Tamora. It's been great to be on, and we've got into the deeper subjects, which is great. So thank you to you for that as well.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Speak to you soon, Will. Bye.
Take care. Cheers.